Boom. What an intro. LVC, NFL week number 4 football betting contest countdown show. I think this is going to be a lot of fun to talk about this week, which, as we were talking about before we came on, this has potential to be that week in Survivor where everything gets blown up. And, of course, that week where all the teasers might go. There's a lot of sort of divide here between some of these games, the numbers and positions ultimately going to be taken. It's a fun one. How are you feeling going into week 4?
Oh, I'm very excited about week 4. I think it's going to be a very interesting week. So I can't wait. I really can't.
So before we go there, we just got to take a look back because it's important to mention the all-important single veto of a season that we put into place yesterday, still alive with the Arizona Cardinals. The veto is still, look at that. We got the flashing graphic and everything. The veto is still alive. The Arizona Cardinals, which I was adamant about, made our top 5. And dare I may say, gave us our first week in the positive for picking these consensus wagers. Important reminder, the disclaimer at the start of every show, we are picking the top 5 consensus. These are not the bets we were making, but the Cardinals snuck in there, and we got 3 of the 5 last week for our first week on the positive side. Anything else from last week stand out to you in terms of how the top 5 settled?
Well, yeah, your veto made it in there, number 5, just barely in there. So
it's in there. That's all that matters.
And gracious in losing, you win the heads up because I took a pot shot on Pittsburgh. I should have taken Washington, but either way I would have lost. So kudos to you. You're up 2-1 for the season. And one thing I do want to mention is I've had a lot of people contact me enjoying the process of how we're discussing these games because I think it's very unique. You're not going to find the content anywhere else where the goal is not to pick the winners. You're discussing thought processes, which is coming from an entirely different viewpoint. And I've had a handful of people reach out saying that they really like that aspect of it.
Was that just like the most shameless self-plug of all time for a piece of content that anybody is doing? That was fantastic.
No, but I think it is. Because I enjoy doing it, and I enjoy the fact that people are realizing that there's more value to just listening to discussion about the games in general from completely bizarre angles sometimes and different perspectives.
I'd go one further and say that this is real live problem solving on air because there's no reaction time to this. We can kind of have ideas of what's going to come in, but the lines just came out from Circa about 6 minutes ago. So this is as live of a sort of problem solving dynamic that we can get into. And like you mentioned, it's a very different angle and it's not necessarily for everyone, but I think if you listen to the back and forth and some of the breakdowns, you get a viewpoint that is not coming from a picks only driven standpoint, right? We're really talking about the numbers and the lines, and a lot of people, if they can get their head around it, are probably taking value for their own pools at home or even for their cards that they put in for Sunday just with their sports book. So definitely something for everyone, I think, as we go. Anything before we go into week 4 about the double pick last week? Both Miami and Las Vegas made it into the top 5 with it being the same game. To me, we see this a couple times this season, so it's not completely unusual and rare, but that was a game that we picked the Raiders to be in the top 5, so we anticipated that, but it was never a game where I expected there to be that much interest in Miami with the backup quarterback situation. Was that not unusual for you to see or unexpected as it was for me going into that?
I was disappointed that I had forgotten to even consider the plausibility of that happening. So I'm wondering whether that will kind of skew us in the future where we're searching for those types of games down the road because they don't happen very often and they're hard to pick out. So that was my initial reaction with that is I didn't even consider it, the possibility of it. So
the Las Vegas support is very real, though. This is now twice in 3 weeks that they've made it into the top 5. Kind of had week 3 pegged, but that week 1 against Baltimore, I think, where they were the most picked, was still very surprising. So interesting week 3, but as we said at the top of the show, week 4 has the potential to be one of the more divisive weeks, I think, heading when we look back at the end of the season. There were a lot of big favorites, a lot of teams laying 6 points or more. We've got the huge favorite with Buffalo, and then a lot of short, sort of pesky road favorites that we know home field advantage is worth less and less every week as we go in this league. And so people are going to be looking very much from one side or the other. They're not really accounting for the lack of home field and really seeing it the other way. In terms of looking at sort of the ones that stand out the most, if we're going to start building our top 5 consensus picks for week 4 that will be released Saturday afternoon, to me, there's one that stands out more than any, but I'm going to let you ease in here if there's something that stands out. You want me to keep going off the win with Arizona there?
Yeah.
I think the Bucs at 6.5 has the potential to be certainly in the top 5, but when we're talking about just sportsbook liability as a whole, which again is different from the contest, but just sort of building into it, this is going to be arguably the most one-sided game that books are going to be dealing for the course of the season. And I think I'm confident saying that now, not knowing how things are going to shape up for the next 11 to 12 weeks, but there is so much potential for this to be just a massive house versus better type of situation. And with this being at 6.5 in the contest, seeing it 7 basically everywhere else within the market right now. And I just think inevitably it is going to continue to go up. I think at 6.5, we have to start off this week talking about the Buccaneers in the top 5.
Yeah, that's the obvious. That's the obvious one there. There's going to be some real traumatized sportsbook operators if going into that Sunday night game potentially with the teaser liability, the money line liability. But they're not going to have the ability to take that over the 7, I don't think, because they'll just get pounded the other way. So I agree with you. I think the 6.5 in the contest is probably just taking a first glance at this is going to be one of our 5 selections.
I think so too. And here's producer Brady, very sharp this morning, pulls up the Covers contest consensus. And obviously these are free play contests available on covers.com, but these are consensus numbers that have been around for more than a decade now that a lot of bettors tend to look at. And while we've seen them at times line up with the more sort of, we'll call it savvy players in the Circa Million, just because of obviously the entry fee being a barrier to entry, 84% of almost 1,000 users that have played in the Covers contest this week have selected the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at 5.5, 6, and 6.5 going into this weekend. Historically, we don't tend to see any of these numbers exceed 75%. And so it's a rarity when you get to game time and you see a number this lopsided, but just sort of another data point on top of what we already know and what we're going to expect with this game, seeing them at 84%. But this is as one-sided as it gets. So I think unless there's any sort of devil's advocate that you want to play here, I think 6.5 makes it into the top 5.
Yep. But you have to remember, I don't even look at these lines until we're on the show. So it's good to touch on every game, when possible, just to at least glance at it. I know like 2 weeks ago, I realized, I didn't even notice that game. So I just think I think it makes for better discussion to kind of work things out along the, throughout the show, quite frankly.
Genuine honesty right there from LVC. I'll throw another one at you. Same point spread. Packers 6.5 point favorites hosting the lifeless Pittsburgh Steelers, who still don't have an offensive line, might be without a number of wide receivers. Last week targeted Najee Harris 19 times out of the backfield. Roethlisberger's arm looks even more so lifeless than Drew Brees a year ago, where he was struggling to push it more than a couple yards downfield. Rumors of an offensive shift from Matt Canada and the Steelers, going back to a shorter passing game reminiscent of what we saw from them last season. Can they do it on a short week going over to Green Bay, who everybody just saw go into San Francisco and get that win on Sunday Night Football? What's your stance on this one with the Packers 6.5? I'm thinking that might be another popular one.
Yeah, that's certainly one to consider. That's sort of Yeah, that's definitely a consideration there, especially with all the injuries in Pittsburgh. I think people are giving up entirely on Big Ben, and everybody's seen what a sieve the Green Bay defense is. And when you really think about it, if you're a Steeler backer, even knowing the Green Bay defense is as bad as it is, it's really hard to picture Pittsburgh even scoring over 20 points at this point. So yeah, I think it's going to be very attractive, very attractive. That's definitely one to put on the list.
Okay, so we'll circle Green Bay. I don't know if we're going to see a situation where the Titans laying 7 on the road ultimately make a lot of cards. There's been an effort to sort of fade the Jets from a lot of contest players, survivor players as well. But the Titans with that defense is not something I think a lot of bettors are going to be able to trust laying a big number on the road. But with that said, it is the Jets, and anything is possible when you're playing the New York Jets. This could be, as we've seen, another blowout of a team just absolutely suffocating that lifeless offense of New York. They lose Marcus May, their best player within the secondary, to go on a number of defensive backs that have already been lost this season. But now that secondary for New York has opened up. We've seen this number come back a little bit. It was as high as 8. So there was support for the Jets above a touchdown. Titans at 7. Making the top 5 or no?
This is a really unique game. It's really bizarre. I've had about 3 or 4 people contact me out of the blue to discuss this game, and it's like angst for them. And they've asked my opinion on betting or contest type information on the game, and it just seems bizarre. Why is this game so important to so many different people? I mean, obviously, on most of the podcasts I've heard this week, there's a lot of sharp people on the Jets, and they lay out the foundation for solid reasons why you should consider the Jets. They played 3 tough teams, while at the same time, on my rankings, the Jets are number 11 defensively. So you can really make a case for the Jets here. So this doesn't strike me as a game that ahead of time people would really have that much of an interest in. I mean, I can't see people taking Tennessee -7, but the value of not having that hook with the Jets might turn some people away from taking the Jets. They would have wanted that hook. So
absolutely,
kind of wishy-washy on that one.
So the other big favorite on the board, I think we need to get to. We left you hanging there for a second, but the joys of tech in 2021. I hope you gave the users something to really.
I have no host experience. It won't work out well.
For the Cardinals, like you were in the chat. But I was going to say, I think we can rule out the Bills at 16.5. Contest players not running to lay 2 touchdowns and a field goal. We can move on from that one. So the only other big favorite that's really sitting out there is KC laying 7 on the road. We would obviously talk about Thursday Night Football, but we haven't seen a TNF game make it into the top 5 just because it's so quick. But Chiefs 7 points on the road at Philly. Another game where once it got above a touchdown, money came back heavily, grabbing the hook with the Eagles. I am shocked at how many people, through my power ratings article, through watching mainstream media, have been labeling the Chiefs as dead. And I couldn't disagree more with that. And I think the offensive numbers that they've shown indicate that this team is just fine, and it's just negative variance from turnovers that have been affecting them late. It's very uncharacteristic for what we've seen. Are you writing the Chiefs off? And if not, is this a game you think contest players are going to rally around looking for that bounce back spot in the easiest game of their schedule so far after a tough opening 3 weeks?
Well, I have Kansas City sandwiched between Jacksonville and Washington for the worst defense in the league. So I think that's one of the problems with Kansas City right now is people see that they can't stop anybody. So and obviously they're getting off to these slow starts. So, last year they were getting out to these big leads and kind of coasting a little bit and letting people back in. They're doing the opposite this year in some cases. So that's the concern. I would be remiss if I didn't bring this up. I tweeted out last week that why do you put solid numbers on games that don't need to be solid numbers? It really is a disadvantage for people. It's a disadvantage for the whole contest as a whole because it limits movement. You want the maximum amount of variance as possible week to week because it makes it exciting. And the more games that you have lined on solid numbers, the higher likelihood you're going to have pushes and more stagnation within the contest. So I can't advocate strongly enough that I wish the Super Contest and Millions would use as few even numbers as possible. And this week there are painfully numbers that didn't need to be on solid numbers. And in this Kansas City one might be one. I see that it's a solid 7. So maybe I picked this up, with the wrong game. The one game I'm looking at is the Lions, little off topic there, but I just wanted to mention that while I had it in thought. But I think that this isn't a game that's going to be popular because I think it's going to be a little bit of both sides on it. I think the Eagles will get some support. They're at home. They're coming off, an ugly performance, but it is a short week on them. That's a tough game. That's a tough game.
So let me ask you this, to your point. So let's say we see this and obviously the market always has a say in what gets picked because people will look at what the current price is. Contest lines are stagnant. So we're going to see the potential where there's a big movement and people just back it for the value because the market is more current. But for just hypothetical sake, taking that out of it, if this is 6.5, Kansas City a top 5, to your point where you're saying you want to hook either way.
Yeah, it would definitely be a strong consideration. I wouldn't say it would be a no-brainer. You have to remember, I'm trying to remember the data. I guess somebody was commenting about last week's Kansas City participation in teasers, and they were a very low-ranked team as far as teams that people were teasing last week. So that really sends off the warning signs in a very strong way that people didn't even want Kansas City at the pick'em they could have had last week. So, answering your question, there's just a lot of people that are off this Kansas City bandwagon, which is kind of silly because we kind of knew that they were going to get off to a rough start anyway.
There's a brutal schedule.
Yeah, it's a rough beginning of the schedule, and it's okay.
So, now throw it the other way. If this is 7.5, Eagles a top 5.
The Eagles just don't seem to be a popular team. It probably just worth considering. I think people want to just stay. My instinct is people want to stay away from those two teams at the moment more than gravitate to either one. What do you think?
Okay. No, it's fair. And obviously part of this, as we identified in week 2, is it's great to pick a lopsided game for what we're doing, obviously trying to pick the top 5 consensus. But in order to be a top 5 consensus game, it has to be a popular game that's picked overall. And we got burned by that a couple times where we're picking 75, 80% sides in terms of the differential for how much they're picked over the overall total. But we're picking games that aren't popular enough to make the top 5. So it's a two-way thing and goes to what you're saying at the top of the show where this is really different and really difficult. So as it stands now, we've got the Pats at 6.5. We've got the Packers at 6.5. I think we're both comfortable about those. You mentioned the Lions. That's a game we've seen a ton of movement on so far. Opened 6, got absolutely blasted down. So that goes to the field goal and even through the field goal at some places. So that's as big of a move as you're going to see. And it's arguably a situation where, as crazy as it's going to sound to come out of my mouth, Jared Goff, Dan Campbell, and Anthony Lynn might be the better head coach, OC, and QB dynamic in this matchup. You think the Lions continue to take action in the contest as well, enough to make the top 5?
I think that 3 is going to make a big difference and make them very popular. I think everybody understands that the Lions don't seem to have any quit in them. They have a lack of talent, but they're going to play hard. They've got that Midwest work structure, behind them. And that's why people are kind of falling in love with the Lions a little bit. They're going to be lovable losers, but with spirit and heart. And I'm hearing that from all over, from all different sources, and it's kind of nice to hear. And he's hiring a lot of great. Campbell's hiring a lot of great support staff. They publicized today that they've got a guy that is fully responsible for clock management, which is very important. Which a lot of teams should.
Every single one should have that.
So they've got a lot of talented people in different positions. They're building up a nice support team. They just don't have anybody, but they're going to play with heart. And I think the average fan sees that and gravitates to a team that they at least know is going to play hard and has a chance. And that's why I think the Lions are a good look here.
So they were down 4 scores against the 49ers in week 1, came back and got the back door for those who bet it late. In week 2, they took a halftime lead against the Packers in Lambeau. And then in week number 3, last week against the Ravens, they forced Baltimore to a 66-yard field goal to get the win. So in terms of what you're saying about the fight, definitely seeing that. And I think the big thing is when a team reflects the personality or the strength of their head coach, that's a very important indicator, at least for me from a betting perspective, of a team that has bought in and that you can trust on a weekly basis. I still don't trust the quarterback, but I've got to say that Goff through 3 weeks has put up some impressive numbers. Now, let's see what that ultimately looks like in a non-negative game state where he's facing prevent defenses coming from behind down a couple touchdowns. The only real time we've seen that was in week 2 in the first half against Green Bay. But when things start to flip, he's still the Jared Goff of old. But certainly his numbers through 3 weeks have been promising. And like you mentioned, that team is really buying into Campbell and his personality, which I think matters a lot. The same cannot be said in any way for the Bears. The only thing that I would say here is we don't know who the starting QB for Chicago is going to be. I think the Lions are definitely in the top 5, getting 3 here if it's Justin Fields. However, if it's either the other 2 veteran QBs, we might see this settle back on the 3. But if it is Fields, I think it keeps moving down towards a pick'em, probably ends up closing somewhere in that dead zone, Bears 1.5, 2. But either way, if you're good to put it in the top 5, I'm good to put it as well.
Yeah, I think and I actually worry more about Fields being the quarterback if I'm looking at it from the Lions' perspective, because if he gets out of containment, I mean, it's off to the races. So the Lions defense should be able to contain, either the other 2 quarterbacks, but Fields, how do you prepare for that guy? He can, he's going to be so reactive, and the Lions just don't have that defense to really cover up if he gets loose. So he might be able to do okay against this Lions team, and they'll probably send him out there because this defense is really, their front 7 is really strong. But after that, there's nothing. Nothing.
And the injuries have been no friend to the Lions within the secondary. So we'll lock in Lions +3 to go along with the Packers and the Buccaneers. I think we're both thinking of a team on the board that we know might make the top 5, and we've heard a lot of people talking about them too. That would be the Baltimore Ravens on the road at the Denver Broncos. Am I right in saying that we're both thinking that this might be a team that cracks the top 5 this week?
Yeah, the hilarity is we have done 0 prep on this and fully aligned on this one. It's comical. So I agree. When I initially looked at the slate this week, I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw Denver favored. Frankly, I mean, I threw in a bunch of Baltimore teasers and. That was my initial reaction, and I think that's what the public is going to be seeing. They're going to see the Denver injuries. They're going to see, Baltimore getting a little healthier this week. You got a little wake-up call last week after the letdown Baltimore had after the Kansas City win. So I think Baltimore is going to be a strong choice this week.
Yeah, and so a couple things to support that too. So the summer look-ahead lines, which are largely ranked on the preseason win totals and derived from those numbers, had the Ravens 3.5-point favorites in this game. The look-ahead last week had the Ravens 1.5-point favorites in this game. And then we get to the opener this week, and it's the Broncos favored in the game. So it's a significant shift. As you mentioned, when it comes to a situation like this with the contest players and the entry fee that has to bring them in to get into the contest, it's not always just about sort of the square or potentially like the dumb play that's on the board that's going to make the top 5, because there's effort that goes in from a handicapping perspective. We have to account for that. And if you look at this, the Broncos face the easiest schedule of opponents through the first 3 weeks of football. Their numbers offensively far surpassed any preseason expectations that anyone really had within logical reason. They're right at the top, number 2 for offensive efficiency. They've been terrific. Bridgewater, all of a sudden throwing downfield, dynamic. So we see this huge boost from the Broncos. On the other hand, let's think about the Ravens and what we've seen from them. Monday Night Football, they lose in overtime to the Raiders. Week 2, they squeak by KC by a point in a game that everyone was watching on Sunday Night Football. Last week, we see them struggle and again need that 66-yard field goal to beat the Lions. So we're seeing everyone look at the Broncos in a great light. And it's like the Ravens, with the injuries, with the COVID situation, with the crazy finishes all 3 weeks, I think there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of people just not trusting the Ravens for what they are. The one thing I would say to that is this week going into week 4, it's really like the first true potential reset or like full game effort that we might get from Baltimore, because week 1, they're arguably looking forward to Kansas City on a short week. Week 2, we saw what that game meant to them, taking victory laps after the win, running around, high-fiving fans, taking photos on the field, enormous win. And week 3 is like the inevitable letdown that everybody talked about, right? So it's like they've almost in a way played to expectation, yet I think the way that they've done it and how crazy it's been sort of takes things away from this number and is in large part with the Broncos' success for why we're seeing this. So I think from just a handicapping situation, a lot of people are going to look at and just latch on to the Ravens for sure. So I'm with you. A little bit of context to that one, but I think Ravens definitely find their way into the top 5 too. So we've got 4. Where are we going for the 5th?
I think we've got a real problem with the 5th.
I think so too. We might be here a while.
Let's go backward on it and eliminate games and see what you're left with.
Okay,
is something that I like to do. So we've eliminated the Thursday game. I don't think you can eliminate Washington Falcons necessarily.
I think that's one we'll talk about.
I think
Detroit, Chicago, we've picked.
I think we eliminate Titans, Jets.
I think so too.
I think we eliminate the Browns, Vikings, just because I believe I just believe that there's enough
support both ways.
Yeah, I think there's going to be enough support both ways on that.
I think so too.
I mean, I think the Browns are going to get more support there, but I don't think it's going to be overwhelming. And I think you have to consider the Colts-Dolphins game. I think that's going to be very one-sided.
Okay.
So I think the Dolphins are going to be a strong consideration. What do you think on that one? I kind of put that in there at the moment, temporary.
Well, I certainly didn't see the support for them coming last week, getting 4 at the Raiders. Now they're laying less than a field goal to the Colts team. Quentin Nelson not practicing. Darius Leonard not practicing. 2 enormous names on both sides of the football. Carson Wentz still doesn't have any ankles. And so we saw what he looked like last week in that situation without it. So you get the banged up quarterback, but then you're going to get the people looking at the indoor team going to Florida in September, playing in the heat. That's always a factor this early in the season. So I think that support last week, at least for me, on a number that wasn't really off market, was pretty telling for how much support they got in the contest. So certainly one we can circle, but let's eliminate a couple more games here as we go, and we'll come back to this one, and then I think we'll come back to Washington, Atlanta, which is interesting. Panthers, Cowboys, a game I have a strong opinion about, but I don't know if it's going to be a huge contest one. What do you think here?
I think the Cowboys are going to take water here and get a fair amount of support from the public. I think it's going to be sort of like the Dolphins. Dolphins and Cowboys are kind of in the same boat here, where if you're not doing your homework, and you're kind of a weekend guy, or you're just not digging in deep, superficially look at these matchups and go, how are these numbers even this close? So, uh, Dallas coming off Monday Night Football, easy win. And I think Cowboys will certainly get a hell of a lot more votes. It's just a matter of the volume of people that choose that game.
And it's the Panthers in a very similar situation to Denver. They're the number one ranked defense for defensive efficiency, number one for success rate, right at the top for all the metrics that everyone looks at. But they play Zach Wilson in his first ever career start. They play Davis Mills in his first ever career start. And then they play Jameis Winston, who still hasn't thrown for 150 yards this season. So when it comes to an easy schedule building up a defense, the Panthers are certainly the team that stands out more than any other. But it is surprising to me that they continue to take money within the betting market. So let's put the Cowboys 4.5 in that conversation as well. We've got a handful of other games to eliminate. And I think it's safe to say that we can put the Giants and Saints on the shelf for now.
Agreed.
Chiefs and Eagles, we've talked about. That one's out. Texans, Bills, we've talked about. Cardinals and the Rams. This number was 6, down to 4.5. Rams off a big win against the Buccaneers at home. Now get the Cardinals within division. Cardinals off of a comeback victory and cover against the Jags, where they were very heavily supported, as I very clearly identified before the show was complete last week. Rams at 4.5 or Cardinals at plus 4.5. The veto is still alive. Do either of these make the top 5 potentially for you?
I don't think so, just because I think there's going to be a divide on the game. But it could, if there's a point movement either way, which there could be, then it could become much more popular. So, but for our purposes today, I think
leave it
the
on the
information
side
we have at the moment, I think it would be too equally divided.
Okay.
I mean,
that's fair to say. So I think we can say the same thing about Seattle, San Francisco on the 3.
Yeah, I think probably from what I can surmise, Seattle's getting a little bit more support in their desperate situation.
Yep.
And it is a favorable line. I mean, it's not going to shock the world if the Seahawks at plus 3 make that top 5. But I think there's going to be a divide on that both ways that prevents it from doing so.
Me too. So we've already picked the Ravens. We've already picked the Packers. We've already picked the Bucs, which leaves the Raiders and Chargers at 3, which is where the market is now. We've seen a back and forth on this game between professional bettors within the betting market. But when it comes to contest players, what do you think about this one as the last one we would potentially eliminate? Raiders getting a lot of support the first 3 weeks of the season.
I've got a little comment on contest, and I don't know whether it's a fact or not, but I tend to think, unless it's the end of the year, people kind of like to have their contest picks decided by Sunday. So I think there's at least 10 to 15, maybe even 20% of the people that really don't want to go into a Monday without their contest decided, because there that lag time between Sunday night and Monday morning it's not as bad as the Thursday, Sunday, but it can become aggravating, and it can take a mental toll of, oh boy, if I can just get this, or boy, I better not lose that. They don't want that extra day of grief. So that's just my philosophy there. Doesn't relate to this game, but that's my 2 cents.
With Thursday night volume for Survivor, as we saw last week, we had the discussion at the end of the show. We'll get to Survivor in a second, but we saw that, as potentially obvious as that was with Carolina, the volume of selections just wasn't there because it is the Thursday game. And so certainly when we're looking at Thursday night games, it's tough to get them into top 5 or as the most picked for the consensus is we're doing. So I'm with you on there. The only thing I would say is Monday Night Football week 1, we saw the Raiders get a ton of support there against the Ravens, catching points. I don't know if it's a local aspect or what's going on with that, but like the Raiders just getting a ton of attention in the contest. But do you want to Do you want to come back to this one and then just look at those other three that we had circled and eliminate two of those?
I tend to think that that Raiders-Chargers game is going to be pretty darn equal.
And the market reflects that so far. We saw that the Chargers took money at 3, got to 3.5. The Raiders took money. Circa goes with 3 here in the contests. I don't know if it's going to be as one-sided as that Ravens situation.
I feel that between the Cowboys, Washington, and the Dolphins, you've got a higher probability of getting a team in the top 5.
Okay, so let's start with this one then. Which of those 3, Dallas, Carolina, Indianapolis, Miami, Washington, Atlanta, which one of those 3 has the potential, not from a side perspective, but just total, the more popular game or the more picked? Because I think that's what it's going to come down to here for us.
You know what I think? I just think that Dolphins looks too easy. It looks just so easy because, the Colts looked so horrible. They won the turnover battle by 3 and still didn't sniff covering last week against, Tennessee. I mean, come on. So I think that that's going to be just too fresh in people's minds. And all, Dolphins have to do is basically win at home. And as you mentioned, with the additional injuries, the Colts are facing, you're just piling on at this point on reasons to go against the Colts. I think
it's does the fact that Miami's coming off of that overtime game that went almost a full extra 10 minutes ultimately come into play here, plus the travel. Do you think that deters anyone?
I think probably 1% of people actually remember that a team played overtime or even considers whether that's going to take its toll the following week. I mean, you probably have, my guess is maybe 20% of people even remember a team is coming off of a long or a short week. So I just don't think it's a focal point. What do you think?
It's tough. And especially, I guess, the only thing from the contest perspective that's making me lean this way more so than potentially the Cowboys-Panthers game is the fact that we saw so many people backing Miami last week. And I think that carries over too when people get rewarded at that amount of volume in a matchup that's arguably much easier to both handicap and to see them coming away with the result. So just the way that the market is trending with this game right now, you're looking at a lot of books at 2. Circa's coming out with 2.5, but that matches what they're taking bets on as well. Obviously, key market makers within the industry. So that's certainly interesting overall to see that stance that's being taken a little bit. So I'm good if you are with Miami at 2.5 to round out our top 5.
Yeah, let's just do that.
So to recap here, we've got the Bucs on Sunday Night Football, which we think is a no-brainer. We've got the Packers at 6.5. We've got the Ravens +1. And then we were going back and forth quite a bit on where we were ultimately going to settle. But I think we were both very comfortable with Detroit getting 3 points as a dog on the road. And then we're going to round off the top 5 with Miami -2.5. Feeling good with that?
I do feel good. I think I'd be surprised if we don't hit 3 out of 5 of these.
I think so too. I think the first, I'm a little bit uncertain about the 5th one, but I think between the first 4, I think we're good for 3 out of the 4 there, which gets us. So feeling good about that this week, much like I was last week as well. Survivor this week, we've made it. It's too easy. The Bills are going to be the most picked. I don't think there's any question about that. Last week, it was the Broncos as the big favorite on the board. So there's not much of a discussion there, but we'll make it a little bit more difficult on ourselves. And just for the sake of the listeners, that second team that's going to get selected. There's a lot of 7, 7.5, 6.5s out there. What do you think the second most selected game is going to be for consensus this week for Survivor?
My suggestion would be the Bengals because that seems like a good spot. But
the sound effects preceding the pick makes it just illustrates the issue with Survivor in week 4.
I think Boy, they might gravitate to those Saints, right?
That's above the 7, against
Yeah.
the Giants. Like when we're looking at teams, you can sort of. It's a weird week because there's big numbers on a lot of teams, but when you get to the touchdown and more, like it's a lot of trust to put in the Titans. It's a lot of trust to put in the Bengals, and it's a lot of trust to put in the Saints. And it's a bit of an unusual week where outside of Buffalo, like usually when you're looking at these big point spreads, you're getting these top tier teams. And I don't think anybody's putting the Saints, the Titans, or the Bengals in that top tier of the league. It's sort of a reflection of the opponents they're playing, which I think leads us to looking at this week as that potential big burial week that we haven't seen books clean up on yet. But there's about 3 or 4 of these games with teams that are laying big numbers that just they're not that top quality, top elite teams within the league that typically lay these big prices. So I think I'm with you too that the Saints against the Giants at home is going to be that second most selected.
Yeah, the home away dichotomy is going to steer people toward the Saints, I believe.
For sure. So that leaves one order of business where we have to go with our most selected game. And so it's a head-to-head contest. Correcting you from the start of the show, you are up 2-1 for the elusive end-of-season steak dinner. Last week, I got the pick. I went with Arizona, and I was able to just edge you out on that one. So it is 2-1. This week, you pick first, and we were picking the most selected side in the Circa Million. But if it goes by the number of picks. That's an important thing to remember is we're going head-to-head here. Number of picks total. Whoever has the higher pick side gets to win. 2-1 for you. You lead off. Where are you going with week 4 most selected?
This is really tough. It really is. But I'm going to probably leave you with your number one choice.
Well, that's nice of you.
I think your number one choice would be Tampa Bay. I'm going to leave you with Tampa Bay, and I'm going to take Baltimore.
Okay. So you got the Ravens. I have the Buccaneers. Head-to-head contest. We'll see which of those gets the most selections for the Circa Million. It was very nice of you to leave me with Tampa Bay. I'll be very surprised if Ravens are going to be popular, no question, but I'll be disappointed if I don't tie things up here through 4 weeks and get the win with the Bucs this week.
Hey, this isn't as bad as the Pittsburgh one I gave you last week, but I'm certainly coming from behind on this. So
we'll see. I'm sure you won't be as generous towards the end of the season when you have some ground to make up. Fantastic. Any other thing you want to mention before we send people on their way this fine Thursday morning?
I drove by the Golden Steer yesterday. I couldn't quite get a snapshot off of it. I was in a hurry to fund an account, but I'll get a photo for you as a reminder.
The key is to sit at the Sinatra table where they've got the pictures. It's apparently where all the guys used to sit. And the fun thing about that is like what I love most about Golden Steer, obviously the meat is fantastic, but there's 2 things. The video poker machines on your left when you walk in are iconic. It's a heck of a bar to sit at. But the table side service, it's the only time you'll see me eating a salad. You get the waiters. They're all veterans. They've been there for 3-4 decades. They do the whole thing table side, and it just makes me want to eat a salad before I get into a giant piece of meat. But there's no, in my opinion, it's the best spot in Vegas for a steak that not a lot of people know about visiting the city, mainly because of the area of the city that happens to be in.
Well, I've got 2 things for you. I hate to burst your balloon, but due to recent society changes and what we're able to do, I believe the tableside service has been discontinued.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, so
we were trying to end this on a good note.
I know, but I've never been to the Golden Steer. Can you believe how long I've lived in Las Vegas? I've never eaten there, so I'm looking very forward to it. And I've heard awesome things about it, but they are not attached to a casino, so I never have any cons. And it's in a sketchy neighborhood.
Sketchy is a very generous way to put it. We'll end with that. Golden Steer Talk, top 5 consensus one more time before we send you on the way. Buccaneers, Packers, Ravens, Lions, and the Miami Dolphins to round out the top 5. That'll do it for us for week 4. We'll see you back here next Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Thanks for stopping by.